and then we've got other information. I'm just having a look. So these have a lot of words and not that many pictures. Let's find another one where we have more pictures and less words, hopefully. So one of my team, Martin, in fact, put this together for me. He just picked a few random ones for me. Okay, this is an interesting example. Technically, there's a kitchen.
Yeah.
And let's just make this extra big so that we can zoom in, and I'll do this. Right, here we go. Yeah, technically that's a kitchen. But the question is that a kitchen you could use? Like, would a reasonable person use that? Now, in law, there's this idea, it's not legislated, but there's this understanding of what's known as a reasonable person. A reasonable person is just your average. But
And can
the
I add
question
in?
is, yes.
I would say having twin 18-year-old boys, I think they would not be considered reasonable people when you see them leaving my kitchen at the end of time. So,
well, by a different measure, I've read a case argument about this, like just discussion in a particular case, and it was P. M. Bewley, and they were just talking about, would a reasonable person live there, and an unreasonable person who might be an 18-year-old twin, or a vagrant, or somebody like that who's under difficult circumstances, they could live here, but your average person couldn't. So then the point being that we would argue that there is general property neglect, and that there are inadequate facilities for preparing food, which I think you could say there, which I think you could argue, because a reasonable person wouldn't have a kitchen like this, and it's inadequate for food preparation, and therefore it falls under HHSRS guidance. So,
and this is as it is now, yeah? So it isn't, obviously you could give it a clean up, you could put in new appliances, all of those things, but it's what it is right now.
Yes. And exactly, the whole foundation
whether
of,
you can do it tomorrow, whether you can rent that out tomorrow is the
it's the condition at the very moment you've purchased the property. Okay. And so here's some general guidance, which I'm just going to find some pictures, because pictures are nice. And there's a very good document, which I think this one, yes. So it's fairly straightforward, the parameters of this, and other parameters are, so I'll just quickly rattle through this because I think it might be helpful, and then what we can do is perhaps look at some properties on the market at the moment, and then we can help you identify those.
So all right. What is this?
This is a local authority guide to HHSRS guidance. So in other words, housing health and safety rating system. And they're just
something, sorry, that we would find in our own local authority?
Well, different local authorities have their own guidance, or many do, but it's UK wide legislation. So there is a set standard, and so these people have done this document to help explain it, but there are numerous other documents, but they all follow the guidance from HMRC and or government guidance on how to interpret the legislation. So the legislation itself isn't particularly verbose, but there's loads and loads of guidance on it. So does that answer the question?
Perfect. Yes.
Okay. Right. We talked about damp. Excess cold is a good example where, for example, let's say that boiler that you bought that property, the boiler didn't work. Excess cold, actually a really serious issue, and definitely category 1. So busted boiler, or old gas-fired central heating, like out of not fit for use, really, not safe, not fit for use, or those old gas heaters that you got in the 60s and 70s, which you occasionally see in property. Excess heat is a difficult one to argue, really, in this country, so we tend not to talk about that. Asbestos is more widespread issue than many might think. So, you know, those textured ceiling finishes you got in the up to the mid 80s, Artex finish. These textured, unpleasant text. Sorry if you like them. I dislike them. But this kind of thing here.
Yeah.
Any property pre 1985 is likely to have asbestos in the Artex. To don't know why they did it, but that's what they did, and therefore we often argue asbestos in the ceiling finishes. We just say it's a category 2 hazard. So in other words, it's just be aware of it. Don't disturb it. Biocides are an interesting one. If you've got persistent mold and so on, then you got this, you're killing off the mold, but you got all the biocides. And we tend not to refer to that. Another classic is carbon monoxide risk. So we looked at that, the boiler that wasn't enclosed, or no carbon monoxide alarms in the property. Then we have lead paint, not that common, but lead piping, more common than one might think. And especially so for unmodernized terraced houses in the north of England or even in the south, but typically they'll be modernized by now. Radiation, that's a rather unusual one, but radon gas, if a property is located in a place where there's a lot of general background radiation, it's a problem. But then the question is, well, if you knew there was radiation, why did you buy the property?
Would that be something like I'm just thinking of a couple of properties where there's a pylon right next to the property?
Yeah. So high voltage electricity. And yes, I think you could argue that as well. It's not a substantial argument, but I've just kind of dipped into a slight landmine, which is the argument that, well, why did you buy the property if you knew it had all these condition issues? Well, the reality is that doesn't factor into the argument. You just bought the property. It's not why did you buy it. And this is a general principle with all of this stuff, which is it's just what were the facts, not the supposition, not the history, not the future, just what was going on at that moment you purchased. All right. Crowding in space is an interesting one as well. Clutter. So sometimes we see properties which are just full of junk, and arguably we could say that that's a problem. And entry by this is one we come up with a lot. Front door, back door, old wooden, slight bit of rot, that kind of thing. Then we would cite that. Lighting, yes, very often just unmodernized, bad lighting. We would also cite that. Noise, not so much. And then again, on the idea, quite a lot of properties just have a lot of trash. Garden is a mess, that kind of thing. There's rubbish strewn everywhere, and also pictures of mouse and rat poo around the place. Then we're going to talk about this. Food safety, yes. So we looked at that kitchen, inadequate facilities, and arguably doesn't lend itself to decent food safety. So we would argue that. The next one is bathrooms in inadequate state, or unmodernized bathrooms, not fit for purpose. Again, so you can see that there are an awful lot of things here which are kind of counterintuitive, but technically, it's. I'll just show you the language here because this will help. And there's our website. We rank. That's nice. And where is it? Yes. I don't want to get too distracted from this. I'll dig this out in a minute, but we'll carry on just rattling through this. Water supply, those lead pipes. And if you have lead pipes, then you have inadequate clean water supply, for instance, or damaged drains is another one, or blocked sinks, or blocked lavatories, and so on. This, not really, but we see a lot of stuff for falls on level surfaces is an interesting one. So very often there are steps outside a front house and there's no railing, and that's dangerous. Or there are trip hazards around the property. So a good example is a worn carpet with shredded worn carpet, basically with holes in it, and or a parquet floor with bits missing from it. Again, all fall hazards, and those things can injure you immediately, and therefore they are a category 1 hazard. Stairs, a very typical example is 1970s staircases with the this kind of thing here. I'll just make it bigger so you can see it. These staircases don't meet modern building regulations, and I'll just put that in a new image so that I'll make it nice and big. Here we are. Right. It is 100 millimeters, but a lot of the older ones are more than 100 mils, and they're long like this. And so you've got a child messing around here, sticks his head in, loses footing, and that's just a breakneck situation. Horrible and dangerous. So we would definitely flag up those kind of issues where there's risks on stairs. And falls. So this is another one where, for example, let's say you've got a window which can be fully opened on, say, first floor, and you could just tumble out the window. It's a risk. Hazards, we've talked about that. That's very self-evident. And fire risk is another interesting one. So what we see a lot are polystyrene tiles ceiling. This is classic for here we are. I'll just open this one, and this is, yeah, we see this a lot. So 19 properties that were last renovated in the 70s, very often they have these polystyrene tiles, and they are a really serious fire hazard. So that's an immediate red flag for us, and we say category 1, because it is. If that goes on fire, that's going to give you a bad outcome. And then collision and entrapment is things like badly laid out. It's quite a difficult one, but for example, doors not closing properly, or or bad layout in property, that kind of thing. We tend not to refer to that very often. Explosions are pretty self-evident, but good example of that is that old gas fire that is in that 1960s house. That's there to explode on you. And then just here, for example, doors that don't open properly and so on. This is a big one, and this is the last one. And we talked about that earlier. Falling slates are a good one, or walls that have step cracks in them and are likely to collapse, or anything that is going to fall and hurt you badly. That's what one has to watch out for.